The touch of death. Sister Giselle stood on the deck of Ariadne's Fury, her long hair whipping wildly in the wind as the ship tossed and turned in the raging sea. Redbeard and his crew had been on a mission to the Isle of Undead Androids, but as they set sail back to Stormreach, a powerful storm hit them. The waves were enormous, towering over the ship and crashing against it with great force. The wind howled like a pack of wolves, tearing at the sails and making it impossible to hear each other's cries. Giselle could see the fear and determination in the crew's eyes as they fought to keep the ship afloat. With the ship in dire straits, Redbeard and the crew turned to Giselle and other sisters, begging them to call upon their goddess of death to save them. Giselle and other sisters, feeling a sense of hopelessness and a heavy heart, began to pray to the goddess, asking for her mercy and protection for the crew and the ship. But their prayers were not answered, the goddess didn't respond to them. As the ship began to sink, Giselle and other sisters, along with some of the crew, managed to grab onto a small boat nearby. They watched in despair as Redbeard and the rest of the crew were washed away by the waves and left to their fate on makeshift rafts. The boat was tossed and turned by the stormy sea, and the survivors held on for dear life. They saw the Ariadne's Fury disappear below the waves, taking Redbeard and many of their friends and crewmates with it. Giselle and the sisters were filled with grief and guilt, feeling responsible for the loss of the ship and the crew. Great and merciful goddess of death, Sister Giselle said as she knelt on the deck of the small boat, we humbly ask that you welcome the souls of our fallen brothers and sisters who have journeyed to the land of the dead. They were brave and loyal servants of your will, and we are grateful for their service and sacrifice. The other sisters on the boat joined in the prayer, their voices united in a solemn chorus. We ask that you guide them to their rightful place in the afterlife and comfort their loved ones who are left behind. We thank you for the blessings you have bestowed upon us and for the honor of serving you. We are grateful for the final blessing of your presence, one of the sisters said. We know that death is not the end, but a transition, and we are honored to be part of the journey of the souls. We ask for the strength and guidance to continue to serve you and fulfill your will on earth. And we ask for your protection, dear goddess, another sister added, as we navigate the sea and make our way back to shore. We know that we are but mere mortals, and we rely on your grace to guide us. As they finished the prayer, the sisters felt a sense of peace and gratitude wash over them. They knew that their fallen comrades were in good hands and that they were a part of something greater than themselves. They knew that the goddess has a plan for each one of them and that they will always be under her protection. The set of survivors on the stormy sea consisted of 9 members of the crew of Ariadne's Fury, who were mostly sailors and pirates, and 3 Sisters of Pain. The crew was led by Tobias Bly, a cold and calculating man who took charge after the ship's captain, Redbeard, went down with the ship. The crew members were a diverse group of men with different backgrounds, skills, and personalities, but they were united in their determination to survive and find a way back home. The Sisters of Pain, led by Sister Giselle, were a small but devout group of women who worshipped the goddess of death. They were deeply spiritual and were known for their discipline and devotion to their goddess. They had a deep understanding of death and the afterlife, and they believed that their goddess had a plan for them even in the midst of this disaster. They were skilled in healing and rituals, and they could provide the moral support the crew needed, but they were not familiar with the sea life and the hardships that sailors faced. The longboat that Giselle and the other shipwreck survivors were on was typical of the type of boat used by pirates. It was around 30 feet in length and made of sturdy wooden planks, reinforced with iron bands. It was equipped with 8 sets of oars that could be manned by up to 8 rowers at a time, and also a small mast and sail that allowed the boat to be sailed if the wind was favorable. The longboat also had a shallow draft, allowing it to navigate in shallow waters and to land on deserted beaches. As the survivors set sail, the boat was tossed around by the rough seas, but efforts were made to keep it steady and navigate towards land. The supplies on the boat dwindled as the days passed, with fish and collected rainwater being used to supplement them. The boat was the only shelter as they passed through varying weather conditions. After a week on the sea, the survivors were in a dire state. They were hungry, as their food supplies had dwindled, and they were forced to ration what little they had left. They were sunburned and dehydrated, as they were exposed to the harsh sun and salt water without much protection. They were thirsty, as they had limited access to fresh water and had to rely on catching rainwater in their makeshift containers. The physical challenges they faced mirrored the mental and emotional strain they were under. They were desperate, as they had no idea how long they would be stranded on the sea, or if they would ever be rescued. They were faced with the constant fear of death, and some of them were struggling to hold on to hope. The uncertainty and isolation of being stranded on a small boat in the middle of the ocean was taking a toll on them. Their spirits were worn down, as they were forced to endure the monotony of their surroundings and the constant struggle for survival. Some members of the crew and the sisters were starting to exhibit signs of depression and despair. They were pushed to the brink of their endurance, both physically and mentally. The bonds they formed among themselves helped them cope with the situation, but they were all looking forward to being rescued and being able to return home. As the night fell, the survivors huddled together for warmth and to take shelter from the stormy seas. The boat rocked wildly, as the wind and waves threatened to capsize them. Suddenly, Sister Giselle noticed something in the moonlight. She saw a figure standing at the edge of the boat, shrouded in a cloak of darkness. She immediately recognized the figure as the goddess of death, her goddess, whom she and her sisters worshipped. The goddess of death appeared as an ethereal and otherworldly being. The soft light of the moon cast an eerie glow on her pale skin, making her appear almost translucent. She was a tall and striking figure, with long black hair that cascaded down her shoulders in dark waves, as if a shadow itself. Her eyes were piercing, and they seemed to reflect the light of the moon, giving the impression that they were glowing. She was draped in a dark cloak that seemed to absorb the light around her, creating a sense of darkness and mystery. Her features were sharp and angular, giving her an almost gaunt appearance, as if she were a creature of death and darkness. Her presence was palpable and imbued with a sense of unease, a chill in the air that surrounded her. Despite this, Giselle felt compelled to approach her, and as she did, she felt a sense of reverence and fear. The goddess stood before the sisters, an imposing and mysterious figure, shrouded in darkness. The sisters approached her, their hearts racing, unsure of what to expect. The goddess stood silently, looking at them with her piercing eyes. The sisters felt a sense of unease, unsure of why the goddess was there or what she wanted. Without a word, the goddess reached out with one hand and gently touched Giselle's cheek with her finger. The touch was cold, but it was also gentle and comforting. It was as if the goddess was acknowledging the sisters' presence and their struggles. Giselle felt a sense of calm wash over her, as if all her fears and doubts were being lifted away. The goddess then reached out with her other hand and took hold of Sister Lilith's hand. Without a word, she pulled her closer, as if to lead her away. Sister Lilith looked back at Giselle, but this time, her expression was content and peaceful. Giselle understood that her sister was ready to part from the suffering of this world and join the goddess in the land of the dead. The goddess, still silent, led Sister Lilith away with her. Giselle was left alone on the boat, watching as the goddess disappeared into the darkness with her sister. The crew members were shocked when they saw Sister Lilith simply fade away in front of them. They had never encountered anything like this before and were unsure of what to make of it. As the crew members were trying to process the event, they noticed that half of Sister Giselle's face and body had turned blue from the touch of the goddess. Giselle stood there, silent, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. Sister Isadora, however, knelt beside Giselle and started to pray to her as she were the goddess herself. Goddess of death, we thank you for choosing Sister Giselle. We place our trust in her guidance and ask that you continue to watch over us and protect us on our journey. We ask for your mercy and your blessings as we navigate through the dangers of the sea. May your light guide us home and may the souls of our lost brothers and sisters find peace in your embrace. Many of the crew members were confused and had a lot of questions, but the sisters were unable to provide them with any answers. They were just as shocked as the crew and were struggling to understand what had just happened. The mood on the boat was tense as the crew and the sisters tried to process the event. Isadora's behavior, however, reassured the crew that they were still protected and guided by a higher power. 2 days after the incident, the survivors were on the brink of death from thirst and hunger. They were running low on supplies, and their spirits were low as they tried to navigate through the stormy seas. The sisters were trying to help the crew members stay focused, but the crew's mood was grim. They were all weak, sunburned, and on the edge of giving up hope. During the middle of the night, Sister Isadora was woken up by a strange sensation. She looked around and saw a figure standing at the edge of the boat, shrouded in a cloak of darkness. She immediately recognized the figure. The goddess held out her hand and beckoned Isadora to come with her. Isadora got up from her spot and walked towards the goddess. Without hesitation, she took the goddess' hand and allowed herself to be led off the boat. The crew members were shocked, as Isadora also simply vanished before their eyes. The encounter took place during the late hours of the night, as the survivors were huddled together on the boat, trying to keep warm and take shelter from the stormy seas. The boat was rocking wildly, and the wind and waves were threatening to capsize them. Sister Giselle, who half of her face and body had turned blue from the touch of the goddess, was the only one who seemed calm and at peace. One by one, the crew members started to kneel before Giselle, begging for her final blessing. They knew that they were close to the end of their journey and they wanted to be prepared for whatever lay ahead. Giselle, with a serene look in her eyes, placed her hands on each of the crew members' heads and whispered a prayer for the goddess of death to watch over them and guide them safely to the afterlife. She then touched the cheek of each crew member with her finger, in a silent gesture of giving them her blessing. As the crew members received Giselle's blessing, they felt a sense of calm wash over them. They knew that they had done everything they could to prepare for their final journey and that they could now face whatever lay ahead with peace and acceptance. One by one, the crew members then departed from the land of the living, content and ready for the beyond, leaving Giselle alone on the boat. As the days passed, Giselle's earthly needs such as hunger and thirst became a lesser concern for her, her devotion to the goddess of death becoming her main priority. She saw herself as the chosen one, the one who the goddess of death entrusted to lead her people to the afterlife. She spent her days meditating and praying, seeking guidance and strength from the goddess. Her connection to her deity felt stronger than ever, and she felt a sense of purpose and duty to fulfill her role as a sister of pain. As she lost more strength, her visions and understanding of the goddess deepened and she received the wisdom to guide her crew on their last journey. The crew members had already left the land of the living, but Giselle's spiritual quest remained. Giselle's physical form was weakening, but her spiritual state was becoming more powerful. Her body was but a vessel for her connection to the goddess of death. She was a messenger of death, a guide for her crew in their final moments, as she saw her death as her ultimate goal and her passage to the afterlife. She felt that the goddess of death had chosen her for a special purpose and destiny. She was the representative of the goddess on earth and was ready to join her crew and her goddess in the beyond. As the boat finally reached the shore, Giselle mustered the remaining strength she had left and stood up. She disembarked from the boat, her gaze directed towards the horizon where she could see the nunnery of pain, the convent of the sisters, her home, the place where her journey had begun and now was coming to an end. Despite her weakened state, she knew it would take a week of walking to reach there. As Giselle approached the nunnery, she could see Sister Adelina standing at the gates, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Adelina noticed Giselle in the distance and immediately waved to her, signaling her arrival. Adelina was one of the youngest sisters of the order, and Giselle remembered her fondly from her time at the nunnery. As Giselle drew closer, Adelina could see the signs of the goddess touch on her, the pale blue half of Giselle's face and body, which was a sign of being chosen by the goddess. Adelina immediately knelt down, her hands folded in prayer, praising the goddess of death. Giselle walked up to Adelina and touched her cheek. Adelina felt a shiver run through her body, as if the goddess herself had touched her. Giselle's touch was the final blessing, the final farewell, and Adelina knew it. As Giselle looked at her, Adelina felt her strength and energy leaving her, her body went limp, as she passed into the land of the dead, content and ready for the beyond. Giselle remained standing next to Adelina, her finger resting on Adelina's cheek. She stood there for a long time, her eyes closed in silent contemplation. Adelina's body lay there, still and peaceful, with a serene smile on her face. As Giselle opened her eyes, a feeling of calm and peace washed over her, knowing that Adelina's soul was now in the hands of the goddess. Meanwhile, all the sisters had gathered around her, kneeling and deep in prayer. The Mother Superior of the Order, who was the highest-ranking sister, was also present, and she came to kneel next to Giselle. She offered Giselle a pair of long gloves, which she silently accepted. Giselle accepted the gloves, feeling their weight on her hands. She looked around at the sisters, seeing their faces filled with hope and reverence. "We have been awaiting your return, Goddess," the Mother Superior said, her voice filled with reverence. "Welcome home, Giselle."